What's up, Bengals? This is Mr. Z back again for another video, but today I'm joined by a very special guest who also happens to be my brother. Matt, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is Matt Zinselmeyer. I'm Tom's brother. I'm currently here working at the University of Minnesota, where I'm getting my PhD in molecular biology, and specifically, I study plant genetics.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. So yesterday, guys, you all learned about the first and second agricultural revolutions. And so today, we're going to be talking about the third agricultural revolution and then what comes after that revolution. All right. So the third agricultural revolution started around the 1960s. All right. And the big question that people wanted to answer was, how can we grow more product on the same amount of land? All right. You know what arable land is from past units. All right. All of that in the world basically being used. All right. Graph on the right, growing population. We need more food. All right. There are two other main aims of this revolution, which was, well, A, to use the land more productively, and then B, meet the food demand of a growing world population. All right. Now, Matt, why did we all of a sudden need more food on the same amount of land?
Well, as Tom mentioned, that graph there, which was on the right in the previous slide, if we blow that up, pay close attention to what's on the bottom of the graph there. You can see going from left to right at the bottom of the graph, we have years. Now on the y-axis going up and down, we start at 1 billion up to 7 billion people. So you can see, in the late 1800s up until the early mid 1900s, population growth was, relatively steadily increasing. But then right there around 1950, you saw this explosion of population growth across the world. Particularly, if we look at the colors there in the graph, Asia and Africa started experiencing very rapid population increases. And so the rest of the world was looking at this saying, okay, we need to now meet this growing population demand in terms of their food requirements. So both consuming plants, but then also meat, which requires food itself. You got to feed a cow. So meeting those feed demands of the growing world population was really what gave rise to that green revolution, which started around the same time.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, but there's a guy who's really, really important to the agricultural revolution, and more specifically, the third agricultural revolution. All right, and he's actually kind of a celebrity here in Minnesota, right? Have you heard of Norman Borlaug?
That's right, Tom. Yeah, Norman Borlaug. He's a local superstar here. He's been dubbed, as it says on the slide here, the father of the Green Revolution. And for his great work, he was actually awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. As it says, he was a U of M graduate, and most of his work centered around really spearheading this green revolution through plant breeding. So Norman Borlaug devised a team. They would go out into fields across Mexico, parts of the southern United States, and they would breed wheat and corn. And so in the figure there in the lower right, you can see some of the results of Norman Borlaug's work when it came to breeding wheat. So he was thinking about this problem in the Green Revolution. How can we get more production out of the same amount of land? And so ironically, this may be a little counterintuitive, is they ended up making the plants grow shorter in size. And so why is that making them more productive? Well, now you can put them closer together in a field. So we can cram more plants closer together in a field. And the plants will invest all their energy into producing seeds, which are the things that we eventually end up eating. And so this, as it says, the result of some of his great work in plant breeding was to really boost this total production of wheat around the world, making it much more efficient, all through just, crossing plants which were occurring in nature around us.
Now, Matt, would you say that what Norman Borlaug was doing, would that be considered a GMO?
That's a really good question. Technically, no. This would not be considered a GMO in today's definition of a GMO. But he is certainly selecting for these plants to have certain characteristics.
Okay, but I'm assuming, though, that the third agricultural revolution led to the use of GMOs. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely. With our ability to innovate as humans, we are always creating new technology. And so in science, a really big thing that happened in the 1990s was our ability to sequence DNA. When we could sequence DNA, we now knew, hey, what's that genetic code of a plant? And we can start to think about how can we change that to make our plants more suited for their environments. So shown in this figure on the left here, as you can see, what are all of the GMOs which are currently in the world today. So you can see some of the really big players are corn and soybean and cotton. Those represent the majority of GMOs which exist out in fields today. If we were to look at what do these GMOs do, most of them fall into two classes as shown in the right-hand table there. It's either herbicide resistance or insect resistance. So what is a herbicide? A herbicide is something that kills weeds, kills plants. So there's a way that we can make our crops we grow in the field resistant to a herbicide so that when we spray it out there, it only kills the weeds. This represents a huge majority of the GMOs which are out there today. The other big class is resistant to insects. So we can put genes into plants which make them resistant to insects which try to eat their leaves. So these really do represent the two big classes of GMOs that are out there today, which directly came after our ability to breed plants. We could improve them even further using DNA technology.
Great, thanks, Matt.
Mhm.
Now, guys, I think you all know that GMOs are maybe a contentious issue out in society today. And I just want to kind of highlight a few pros and cons of GMOs. All right. So, some pros of a genetically modified organism: we can boost food production. All right. We can use fewer pesticides, which is better for the environment. And there's also a possible addition of vitamins and minerals in the crops that are being modified. However, though, I want to also highlight three cons as well. There's this thing called a herbicide resistant superweed. All right. New proteins in GMO may cause allergic reactions and also may harm the environment by decreasing biodiversity. Those might seem a little bit kind of confusing to you right now. Luckily, we have an expert here. Matt, could you kind of go over those cons there and just kind of explain those a little bit more thoroughly?
So these super weeds that we talk about, nature has a really good way of figuring out a way to survive. So when we spray these herbicides on the fields to kill our weeds, our crop plants, they have a gene in them which allows them to be resistant. Well, there are other weeds out there that they can just randomly mutate so that they are also resistant to the herbicide. So another way to think about this is the longer that we spray the herbicide on the field, the more likely it is that just by random chance, we'll get a mutation in a weed that will allow it to survive. These are referred to as those super weeds, which are pervasive throughout a lot of parts of the United States here, which are resistant to herbicides that we spray on crops.
What is a herbicide and a pesticide?
Sure. So herbicide means something that will kill any sort of plant, and insecticide refers to anything that will kill any sort of insect. So typically, farmers will spray both an herbicide or a pesticide to target whatever pests are challenging their fields.
Do you have any good examples, maybe, of a GMO that we could talk about?
Sure. Yeah. Let's flip to the next slide here. As Tom mentioned in the pros, uh, we can potentially fortify our crop species with vitamins and minerals. And so, a good example of this would be something that's called golden rice. So, throughout the world, there's a vitamin A deficiency in certain areas. Vitamin A deficiency is actually associated with blindness. So if you have a really low amounts of vitamin A, it can sometimes result in you not being able to see. So many scientists thought, okay, is there a way that we can add vitamin A to a crop plant which is frequently consumed in these areas where there's vitamin A deficiency? So rice is grown throughout the entire world, specifically in Asia and African climates. Rice is really well suited to grow there, which were, as we saw in that figure earlier, the areas which have these huge population booms. So scientists introduced two new genes, which are shown there, the PSY gene and the CRT1 gene. into rice. And these two genes actually allowed for vitamin A to be produced in the rice plant itself, which was really exciting. And this vitamin A, it's goldish in color when it's produced. So you can see there in the figure in the lower left, the white rice, that's how it normally looks before we've added any sort of genes into the rice. But then when we add those two genes into the rice and we're getting vitamin A being produced in the rice plant, the grain of the rice starts to turn that goldish color. So you can see these are from vendors selling this rice. You can see the difference between what's called the golden rice, the stuff that has vitamin A in it, and then just the normal conventional rice, which has that white colored grain. So this is still going through some regulatory approvals to be legally sold, but scientists have been pretty successful in increasing the amount of a key vitamin in a rice plant.
Now, Matt, I have a question for you. All right, you know how brilliant I am, and so if
Very.
I was to make a GMO, would I just be able to go out and grow it in a field randomly?
Well, you could, but the feds, they might come for you. So that's not something I'd advise you to do. Uh, yeah, sorry, Tom.
Mm.
But yeah, you really can't just make a GMO. Me, I know how to do genetics. I could try to make a GMO, but I definitely would not be legally allowed to just go and start growing that in my field. So if there's anything you should remember about how are GMOs regulated by law here in the United States, everything is on a case-by-case basis. So there are three federal organizations, part of our federal government, that all regulate GMOs. The first is the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. They work to ensure the safety and the labeling of anything that's going to be used as food or feed for another animal. So if your plant is going to be eaten like that golden rice, the FDA has to approve it. Another organization which works to regulate these GMOs is the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. They specifically look at if you're going to use a pesticide or an insecticide, how will that impact the health of the environment around us? So not only for humans, but for any species that's going to be in that environment. The EPA will look at that specific side of a GMO. And then finally, this is probably the biggest organization that regulates GMOs, is the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture. And so they generally just look at how will your GMO impact agriculture as a whole, whether that's a pest, a disease, or other plants being grown in the field. And so there's a link to this there, which is called the quote, "Am I regulated?" letter. We won't click on that. Perhaps Tom can show you later if you guys are interested. But basically, the scientist will write a letter to the government saying, here's the GMO that I made. Government, do you think I should be regulated? And if I should, how should I be regulated? And so here in the United States, we really regulate GMOs on a case-by-case basis. And it's really quite shocking. It typically takes anywhere between 5 and 10 years and several millions of dollars to go through this regulatory procedure.
So, Matt, where do we go from here? All right, we've gone through the first agricultural revolution. We've gone through the second agricultural revolution. Now we've gone through this third agricultural revolution. Where do we go from here?
Yeah. So with every revolution, we learn new things and we learn maybe what worked and what didn't work. And so moving forward, scientists are trying to do several different things. Going back to Norman Borlaug and what he did, breeding plants, just taking a male and a female, taking the pollen, rubbing it on there, creating a new variety, that still goes on a lot today. So scientists, plant breeders are working to breed really diverse arrays of crops to withstand lots of different stress conditions in the world, whether that's high heat, high salt, any sort of stress condition, we're working to breed plants to survive in those environments. Secondly, as I talked about, we in the 1990s could sequence DNA. Well, now there's this thing called CRISPR. You maybe have heard of CRISPR in the news. This is a way that we can really go in and precisely modify the genes of a plant. You can think of CRISPR as kind of being like Microsoft Word on your computer. We've got this big Word document. We now have the ability to do a Control F to find any sequence in the genome, and then we can hit the delete button. We can type new letters. This was a technique that didn't really exist in the 1990s, and now scientists have the ability to go in and really specifically change the genetic structure of a plant. And so we're working to use CRISPR in combination with plant breeding to really generate new varieties of plants which are suited for the environments that they need to grow in.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Matt, for your time. I appreciate
No
it.
problem.
Everyone, say thanks to Matt.
Thanks for listening to me, guys.